So I've been thinking about something that honestly frustrates me about being human. There have been times where I knew exactly what the right thing to do was, and I still couldn't make myself do it. Not afterwards, not in the moment. I knew certain relationships weren't healthy. I knew people pleasing was exhausting. I knew avoiding difficult conversations would only make them harder, but knowing was never the hard part.
Which which is strange because we're taught that once we know better, we will then do better.
But that's not how people work. If it were, no one would procrastinate. No one would text the ex. No one would stay in relationships that hurt them. No one would keep repeating the same argument, the same habit, or the same mistake.
Well, so then maybe the problem isn't intelligence or learning, but maybe it's something deeper than.
So, today I want to explore a question that I think almost everyone has asked themselves at some point. If I know better, why don't I do better?
Welcome to the existential couch. I'm Brian.
And I'm Wendy. Every week, we sit down to explore one of life's biggest questions through psychology, philosophy, lived experience, and honest conversation. We don't claim to have all the answers. We're simply curious enough to just keep asking better questions.
And today's question is one that can carry a lot of shame. Why do we keep repeating patterns we desperately want to stop?
Before we go any further, I'd love everyone listening to think of one pattern in their own life. It could be a relationship, a habit, a fear. Just keep it in the back of your mind while we talk. My hope is that you'll leave not with a life hack, but my hope is you'll leave with understanding yourself a little more and maybe judging yourself a little less. So, Brian, let me ask you something. When was the first time you realized that knowing the right things to do didn't automatically mean you could actually do it?
Gosh, I mean, the first time, I don't even know if I can really remember the first time that it happened so much as,
Or the most impactful?
yeah, I think it was actually kind of the first time I remember distinctly kind of the first time when away from home, overseas in the military, in a barracks room, still in my teens, right? I was still like probably 19 at the time. And I was surrounded by, people that wanted to get out and do things, or that I knew that I needed to get up and just get out, right? It was even that simple then. I needed to probably get out of the room, or just sitting there watching shows wasn't going to be good for me. I needed to go, I needed to work out. It was, part of my lifestyle, part of my duty even at the time. And I remember it was even an issue of, having trouble sleeping and, a lot of worry even at the time. And I knew that I should get out of bed. Like I knew I needed to. And even then, like that was the first time I remember where I couldn't. Like I kept, like I was like having a conversation with myself saying like, this is what you need to do. This isn't like a want. Like this is something like you've been here for the whole day at this point and you want to just keep laying there because you still feel tired, or whatever is kind of stopping you from wanting to face there. You don't want to get out there. It's still this foreign place, literally, but also figuratively to me. And it was, it wasn't even that it was terrifying. I couldn't even I felt that if I could find a reason that I felt that way, I could fix it. But I couldn't find one. It was just, I couldn't physically get myself to make the decision and then take even that simple step. And, I mean, I kind of want to ask that of you too. Like, is that something that you remember noticing for the first time in your own life?
I think the biggest place I noticed it was with relationships, whether it was romantic or friendships. I kept getting into very unhealthy and honestly abusive relationships. And that's a pattern that I repeated over and over and over and have had a really hard time breaking. And I think a lot of people can relate to that. I think a lot of people can relate to what you were saying too, especially with like, doom scrolling. That that is definitely a huge one that a lot of people struggle with breaking the habit or the behavior of.
And I love that, obviously, like the differences in approach, because when it comes to that question, like it is so, the spectrum can be very broad, right? It can be this
Mhm.
life altering thing, but it can also start with that small thing. And it does also kind of remind me of a question I was asked by leadership, because you're getting grilled, especially at the young age, and especially in your military, and these higher ranking people are asking questions, all these things. And you say something like, "Oh, well, I noticed that I'm not doing as good in life. I'm making bad decisions." And like, "Oh, what is the bad decision?" You're like, "Shit, like I didn't mean anything big. I just meant that like I'm hitting the snooze button too much. And now I'm rushing to work," like that type of thing. And I
Mhm.
can't find the solution. So, the fact that obviously even from there, where we take I'm sure we've both gone through both of those versions, right? Like obviously you talk about relationships and kind of the bigger life things, and where I'm kind of starting off with talking about the smaller things that can add up, but those are all equally important when you're looking at the big picture of life. So did you kind of know in the moment, or in the moments you speak of, the bigger ones that can kind of be, I keep saying bigger, but they're more drastic. Like when you're talking about a relationship that can kind of alter your life, and going back to it, or reaching back out to an ex, or staying in a situation or relationship that you know you maybe shouldn't be in, that isn't healthy. Did you know it in the moment, or was this something that kind of came with reflection?
So I at first you think everything's great because you have your rose colored glasses on, but eventually I think you know that something's wrong or that something's not quite right, but that doesn't mean you're able to leave and or that you're not going to go back. I think a lot of people treat themselves really harshly about staying in relationships or going back to relationships they knew that weren't good for them. And whether that's a romantic relationship or a friendship or even a relationship with a family member, I think a lot of us have that behavior pattern where we get stuck with that situation and it's very hard to navigate your way out of. I mean, they say the average person, it takes them over 7 times to leave an abusive relationship.
And well, and on the other side of that, what you said, obviously not even romantic, right? Like, because
Mhm.
and you and I are kind of proof in a situation of a friendship where there was a point in our friendship or our association where it wasn't good for us to communicate and to
Mhm.
hang out, right? Like there was times where we were either whoever we were hanging out with or whatever the direction we were going, right? And that split happened. But then when we kind of grew and we came back, and we've been lifelong friends, right? So we
Yeah.
can even see that proof through our lives, that sometimes it doesn't mean like that's the end of everything, right? Like
Mhm.
breaking off from those situations when it comes to friendships, relationships, anything like that doesn't mean that it's the end. It just means that, hey, it's not healthy right now. It might be in the future.
Mhm.
But I don't think even having that knowledge, like that, like in and that happening didn't stop me from doing that. Once again, having that knowledge didn't stop me from making a mistake again in the future. I've been um
Are you
in a
calling our
relationship.
friendship a mistake, Brian?
Absolutely not. No, I think we approached it the right way, and that's why it's not a mistake, because it could have been a mistake, right?
Right.
So if we had just, pressed it and been two people that were on different paths or in different crowds, however we want to look at it, like if we had kept trying to butt heads instead of allowing ourselves to be individuals and accepting, like, hey, that person's over there. That's cool. I'm over here. I need to do what I need to do and then come back. But that doesn't always happen, right? I think we have a good friendship and it's lasted a lifetime because we were able to do that and we
Mhm.
were able to see that in each other and to step away from it. Whereas I have had situations with, friends that we both know where I definitely should have like broken off and been like, yo, this isn't good. This is a very toxic thing.
Mhm.
But in my head, I was like, well, yeah, but at the same time, we've been friends for so long. We've, gone
Yeah.
through a lot of things. So you're like, yeah, but maybe you went through some things because it wasn't a good thing,
It wasn't healthy. It's easy to justify for sure.
Yeah.
And
Go ahead.
and I obviously don't want to say like you should go back because this person's gonna change. Because the whole
Mhm.
premise of this is that with our
Absolutely.
habits, a lot of the time your habits don't change. You can intellectually know I want to change. I don't want to do this anymore, and then you still go out and do it again anyways.
So, I mean, especially switching over to and using the word habit, because I think people use it a lot of times. Well, now they're kind of using it appropriately and using habit as a learning process. But obviously, bad habits was a big, I don't know, at least in our time frame in childhood, where bad habits was always, it wasn't anytime people brought up habit, it was because it was a bad habit. That's all they ever wanted to talk about. You
Yeah.
have a bad habit, you have a bad attitude and a bad habit, yada, yada. But is there still, I don't know, a habit that maybe you've understood for years? Like we talked about, we have the knowledge, it worked for us, but there are other times where stepping outside of that, I didn't use that habit. I didn't use that knowledge in other places I should have, in other situations or relationships. So do you feel that you have a habit that maybe you also understand that you still kind of fall back to sometimes?
I definitely probably have an addiction to social media and like I'll be honest and I get stuck in the doom scroll and not wanting to motivate myself to do things that I'm supposed to do sometimes, or I focus too much on like the online world versus the real world. And that can be that can be a behavior of mine that could improve. And I know that too much screen time is bad for you, but yet here I am spending lots of time on my screen. And I think a lot of people can probably relate to that as well. It's pretty common, I think, for our generation and the younger generations coming up,
It's an easy escape in a lot of ways, right? I
for
think
sure.
for me, if you obviously how you're describing it, and for me, I think when it comes to that hyposensitivity or even just needing or subconsciously wanting the distraction from a situation or emotion, like it's such an easy access to just flip through and watch, whether it's a reel. One reel is about, four people trying to do backflips and cracking themselves on the pavement. And the next one is, somebody trying to give some life advice. And you're like, oh man, that's really good advice. I should just keep listening to this. Like, no, you should probably listen to the advice and get off the phone. But
Yes.
I think the problem is that it offers, I don't want to say solution, but it kind of offers a situational band-aid for so many mental processes to escape from. I think that's what helps with the addiction factor of it and
Mhm.
just quick, easy, access to that type of
I think
response.
that's can be said about a lot of habits that people have, whether it's, smoking, drinking, going back to your ex. There's any number of things that have the same reason. And I think most people hear stories like this and immediately think, I need more discipline. But the more I started reading psychology, the more I realized that maybe discipline isn't the whole story. And I came across an idea that completely changed how I think about this, which is called dual process theory. So basically, imagine there are two systems helping you make a decision. One is thoughtful, it plans ahead, it weighs consequences, it thinks about next week. The other is focused on surviving today. It wants relief, comfort, safety. Neither one is bad. The problem is that stress, loneliness, fear, and exhaustion make the survival system so much louder. That's why someone can sincerely want to change and still repeat the exact same behavior. So, knowing better isn't always enough when your nervous system is trying to solve a different problem.
Yeah, and
So,
I
yeah.
I think it also comes into just like like I know we touched on like evolutionary psychology before, and I don't know if we are adapted well enough to the tools that we do have at our disposal. I think is part of it because in that process, when you are, like you said, it is good to think about next week and things or tomorrow, the next hour, those types of situations, what's coming and what's next
Hmm.
to prepare in that prepared mindset, but also the survival mindset, I think is still much stronger in us from an evolutionary standpoint. That the survival of right now, which once again, we just talked about getting on
Hmm.
the phone and surviving the situation and the mental thing that's going on, that becomes the stronger force because I think it's stronger in us still as humans. And I think the tools that we have, like I said, are sometimes more still adapted to that
Yeah.
in
Like
that way.
I think intelligence doesn't make someone immune to emotional decision making, and immediate relief often overwins long-term goals.
Mhm. Yeah, exactly. Well, and I think that immediate relief is what we're attributing to the survival factor. And,
I mean, this
you know,
was one of the biggest mindset shifts for me. I mean, you stop asking what's wrong with me and start asking what is my brain trying to accomplish right now.
well, it is such a different question, right? Like you're not, because especially when you're being curious really gets us further than shaming ourselves, right? We get into the blame game. What's wrong associates with shame and associates with blame.
Hmm.
And then we just kind of revert back into that process versus latching on to the intelligence that we do have and using it. So that doesn't become as important as the kind of a negative attribute that we've put onto ourselves. So do you ever feel like in that when you're battling with what you know is right, your intelligence and that kind of blame and shame factor, do you feel like there's just literally two versions of yourself arguing?
For sure. I think that happens all the time. It's a constant argument. Like you're like, I know better, I know better, I know better. Why I gotta stop doing this. I'm gonna quit this. And maybe you even do quit for a while and then you go back to it. And you're like, then you have that guilt and that shame. Why did I come back to this? Why am I in the same pattern again? How am I gonna get out of this? Am I gonna get out of this? This is what's familiar to me. And I think that's a huge thing right there, familiarity with the situation. Our brains love what's familiar.
Well, and with that, I think relief has become more familiar than actual healings. But do you feel that you ever confuse the two?
For sure. I think so. I think that definitely has happened to me many times. It can apply to so many situations.
And with that, like both of those are technically a form of our brain trying to protect us. Like us being on a
Mhm,
healing journey is a longer term solution, but relief still is kind of that quick shield pop up for our brain to try to protect us, even
mhm.
on the short term in the survival. So do you ever then switch it to say and think about, well, what exactly is my brain trying to protect me from then? If it's taking these two avenues, one short term, one long term, survival versus long term, reactionary versus healing, relief versus healing, I mean,
Mhm.
do you think that that's really what like, do you ever stop and think what your brain is trying to protect you from in that moment versus and does that kind of even help with the longer term solution?
I don't think you can think yourself out of a habit, honestly. I think there's a lot more to it than that, which we'll definitely get into later in the episode. I think something that definitely completely changed the way I think about trauma is predictive processing, because maybe our brains aren't just reacting to the present, maybe they're constantly predicting it based on everything we've experienced before. One of the biggest misconceptions about the brain is that it simply reacts to the world around us. It doesn't. Your brain is constantly making predictions. Before someone finishes a sentence, your brain is already guessing what they're going to say next. Before you step down a staircase, for example, your brain has already predicted where the next step is. So the same thing happens emotionally. Your brain uses past experiences to predict what's going to happen next. And if your experience has taught you that conflict usually ends badly, your brain starts preparing for conflict before it even happens. Or if your brain starts expecting unpredictability, or if love had to be earned, your brain may start believing that's just what love is. And your brain isn't necessarily asking what's happening, it's often asking what usually happens. And then it prepares your mind and body for that answer. And that's why two people can walk into the exact same situation and experience it completely differently. They're not just seeing what's in front of them, they're seeing it through everything that's happened to them before.
Well, it's I mean, I think that's the I don't want to say negative side of intelligence, but it is also the predictive index that we create from our experience. Like you said, the
Mhm.
outcomes, the reactions that we get, I think, is an intelligence base that we build. But I think that's what we rely on too much and what gets us into that survival mode because like you just mentioned in there before, I mean, yeah, it's good to know where the next step is.
Mhm.
But when we're walking in the darkness, sometimes we jack that up too. Sometimes we're not sure.
Yeah.
Sometimes that's changed and we didn't know that that changed. So we didn't know that the outcome could change because we thought we knew better stepping into this situation that seemed familiar.
And next thing you know, you're falling down the stairs.
Yeah, flat on your face wouldn't be the first time. Or my face, not your yeah, I'm not saying that you fall down the stairs a lot, but it does definitely happen to me.
I mean, I do. No, I also
Like
think this.
you can take the moose out of Maine, but you can't take you can't take the moose out of me, I guess is what I'm trying to say.
Oh my gosh. I think this also completely changed how I understood anxiety. I always thought that I was reacting to what was happening, but a lot of the time I was reacting to what I thought was about to happen. And that still that happens to me with my anxiety all the time.
Well, I think that's something that's completely relatable. Like anyone can relate to that, right? How many times, hey, it's actually that. How many times has you or anybody out there that can think about this? How many times have you now I can't talk. How many times have you rehearsed an argument in your head, and then when you get to the conversation, it's completely different, and everything you prepared for isn't what happened?
I feel like you walk in a room already assuming that someone was upset with you, or you read a text message and you automatically assume bad intent, and that can
Like
happen.
an hour ago, to be honest.
Yeah.
When it comes with like when you're already kind of anxious, like you're already reacting, like something else has already happened. You've already been put into that state, and then like you get a message. And then when you're reacting to that message, you're actually reacting to stimulus that you already received somewhere else. Like somebody
Hmm.
else you had a conversation with somebody else that kind of puts you into that fight or flight mode, or just into fight mode, and you're ready for it. So then somebody else reaches out with a similar concept that's completely, I mean, it could be completely innocent, but you're now already reacting to that. Like, okay, here we go again. Now I have to start this whole process over again and, fight this conflict when there really isn't one because you've already reacted and prepared yourself
Hmm.
for something that hasn't.
I think that leads to hypervigilance, and that's basically what you're describing, hypervigilance. And we can expect that these patterns are going to repeat themselves, and we get that anxiety about things like expecting people to leave or always preparing for the worst case scenario. But learning that your nervous system wasn't reacting today, it was reacting to yesterday is definitely such an important thing to know.
Yeah, I mean, I think that might be one of the biggest things that I did learn, especially getting into the therapy. And I mean, even accepting and to use the word like I had a traumatic experience. I've dealt with a lot of trauma, and you take the trauma index testing and stuff like that. And oh, did I score? Did I score good? Well, you scored high, so no, that's not good. But
You passed the test.
yeah,
You've got trauma.
did I do good? Yeah, it wasn't exactly the same reaction I had with the SATs or anything like that for sure.
No, for
But
sure.
it is very much so that way. Like the nervous system has been built over years and years and years and was in different I went from an environment where it was always kind of fight or flight to then
Mhm.
joining the military, which came through basic training and like the military training, the infantry, like all of these things is 100% constantly, fight or flight scenarios and reactionary, like
Yeah.
react quick, react to the violence, react to conflict, be in the conflict, literally jump and run towards the conflict at all times is the mindset. And those neural sheaths go over those neural pathways that were just small little walkways to begin with, and now they're highways to get that information back and forth. And how that work, where you're literally remapping your brain. You have to now remap your brain. You legitimately have to physically remap and rebuild new habits, and that takes time because you are habitually now. Your all of your reactions are based into what you have been leading up to this point. So now you're building. You have to rebuild towards tomorrow while dealing with yesterday at all.
I think a lot of trauma survivors can relate to that. The military is definitely a very powerful example of how that behavior and mindset gets stuck in your brain. And I mean, our brains are constantly trying to predict the future, and those predictions are built from the past. So it makes
Well,
me, yeah.
Also, even the idea of going back to what we talked about, or I just brought up, but preparing for like arguments and then showing up and they're totally different. With that, I can't tell you how many times, like even the thought process of preparing for something positive sometimes then gets a negative spin. Like I'm prepared for an awards board, or I
Mhm,
am training myself to talk and sit in front of this panel of people about positive things with a hope for a positive outcome,
mhm.
but I'm a wreck. Like my
Yeah.
anxiety is going to be through the roof for the next week dealing with this, even if I do win, or even if it is a positive outcome, because like the idea of failure and what comes with that negative side is so much more important throughout the process than whatever positive can come.
I
Because
think I
that's
feel
what,
that way about our podcast sometimes, like when I'm
yeah, I mean,
preparing
yeah.
ahead of this, and I feel the exact same way. So I want to talk about a book I read this week called The Body Keeps Score, which,
Yeah, I'm with it
yeah,
already. I haven't read it, but I'm that's, it sounds right.
it's a book that suggests that these experiences don't just live in our memories, they become part of our nervous system. It's a very clinical book, but it definitely explains why we do the things we do and repeat these patterns. One of the biggest takeaways from this book is that trauma isn't just something you remember, it's something your body remembers. So think about learning to ride a bike. At first, every movement takes concentration, and eventually your body just knows what to do. The same thing can happen with
Mm.
fear. If your nervous system spends enough time believing the world is dangerous, it eventually stops asking permission and it just reacts. And that's why someone can logically know they're safe while their heart is racing, or while someone can trust their partner but still panic when they don't answer the text message. The logical brain has one story, but the nervous system has another. So healing often isn't about convincing yourself you're safe, it's about giving your nervous system enough new experiences that it slowly starts believing it too. So like the body learns patterns just like the mind does basically, and the nervous system can react before conscious thought. And just because you know you're safe and feeling safe, those aren't always the same thing. And healing definitely requires repeated experiences of safety. And that's why you can't just think yourself better. You have to create new patterns and new neural pathways in the brain to get to a place of healing or better decision making. It's not just something you can think your way out of.
So, what's perfect? Have you ever watched I'm trying to remember his name, like, 'cause this just came to be. You ever watched the video of the engineer that built the backwards bike?
No.
Yeah, so I recommend anybody, if I could find it, I would even, kind of link it and show because it's such a great showcase for it. He's like a welder and kind of builder. Yeah, we'll find his name anyway and we'll kind of add it. But the whole premise was that he got on stage and he kind of goes around and does it on stage now where he'll even like give you $200 if you can make it 10 feet. But the bike, when you turn left, like handlebars like you're used to, it goes the opposite direction
Oh.
as you're going. So pedaling is normal, but then when you
Mhm.
go to kind of start yourself off, like it will go the opposite direction. And it took him months and months and months. And then he said there was a point where kind of building that habit, there was that synapses moment that he could feel it where it changed. And suddenly he was just going
Yeah.
and going. And then he started going on tours and doing this backwards bike and handing it to people and literally say, hey, ride this backwards bike 10 feet, you get $200. And nobody was ever able to do it. And then he was actually on vacation sometime later after months and months and months of doing that. And somebody handed him a regular bike. He couldn't ride it. And
Because
it
his
is, but then
brain had wired differently.
literally,
Mhm.
legitimately, like physically, empirically, scientifically, all the big words rewired his brain and the neural pathways and created that neuron sheath over them to make them actually more functionable than his past, to the point that he then had to spend like 2 hours remembering how to ride a normal bike. People thought he was just doing a bit out in public, to the point that once again, he said it just happened. It went click. I felt this firing in my brain and I was able to write again and I could write it for the rest of the day.
Okay.
But it's
I love
this,
that.
yeah. And I try to get the name right out. It was just something I hadn't thought about in a long time. I want to say, started with, I think it's Destin Sandlin, I think is his name.
Mhm.
And he was an engineer that, yeah, it was just this thought experiment type thing. And it's this very physical proof that habits are powerful. Brain mapping is powerful. Our past drives what we can do now and in the future until we actively change it. And it can be very difficult. And that
Absolutely.
we're always falling back. It physically shows us falling back into old habits.
Yeah,
And I
that's
think we all kind
powerful.
of experience that in everything you're talking about, the body keeping score and in the book. And I'm sure it kind of goes along the same chamber, but we all kind of experience that in some level, whether we're trying to try something new, whether we're trying to do public speaking, or, we're sitting here doing this
Mhm.
podcast, even though it's, not directly live, but there's that thing of kind of wanting to fall back away from it. Right.
Mhm.
Going through a painful breakup or walking back, going home after difficult memories and refacing those, or going
Mhm.
back to where your trauma was, is a very, very hard thing to do. Like I know that quite literally went to the other side of the planet for a long time, and the idea of returning, I think the fear came that was, even though I was older, wiser, whatever, like a lot of that was going to come back and I hadn't escaped.
Mhm. That makes sense. Have you ever had your body react before your thoughts caught it?
Absolutely. I mean, that comes from examples of, flinching to whether loud noises
Mhm.
or, other people's body movements, or maybe even just honest reaction, like jumping to frustration or anger or those types of things. Like I can, especially when it does happen, if even in the moments that I can catch it, I feel like I almost have to imagine myself reaching out to physically like catch myself in a way. And I think that in those moments, especially, is when we really want like a quick answer
Mhm.
and like the instant fix. And, even the regret that sets in, you want to even fix that situation immediately, right? Like you want it
Yeah.
to be better. Like as soon as you know that you're caught up to yourself and you've made a mistake, you want to fix it then. And then, but a lot of the times, especially when you fall into that habit, especially myself, I find myself going like, no, now I gotta dig in deeper because I can't be wrong. Because if I'm wrong, then all is lost. And that type of mindset, I think, is one of that root is what's hard to pull out.
Yeah. Have you ever noticed your body carrying stress differently now than when you were
Yeah, I feel it literally in my chest. Like there's times that where it's literally caught up to me in a point that, I didn't legitimately didn't think my heart could take it. And then we went, through situations where that amount of stress and things carried, and I don't know, just being who I was and trying to fight it, like we've talked about, of just make this better, just make this decision, just step out of bed, just, go to work this one more day, whatever it is, making those changes, hoping that fixes it in some way, you just come out of it. And then suddenly one day your heart wants to beat so fast that can't anymore. And then, laying down and trying to take a nap becomes an issue because
It's like
literally
impossible to
feeling,
shut your
yeah,
brain down.
yeah. And then literally feeling the physical sensation of nerves misfiring and
Mhm.
things like that becomes like your body's response because it has no outlet. So it has to find its own. And it's usually not a comfortable, good thing. So the
No, it's
discomfort is going to
not.
come for you one way or another. Yeah.
That definitely happened to me recently. I been under a lot of stress and I shut down and I had to just stop everything I was doing for a couple of days and I had to just stop because I my body was just shutting down. I was my heart was acting crazy. My body temperature was dysregulated. I wasn't sleeping right. I wasn't eating right. I couldn't shut my mind off and it was terrible, and it was making all my health conditions worse, and so I definitely have, felt what that stress or anxiety can feel like in the body, and
And can I ask a question on that, if you don't mind? Do you, in those moments in the feeling and trying to overcome it, did you feel or do you feel sometimes that you still have to be the one to fix it? Even though that obviously we are very open, you and I, and a lot of folks, to like mental health
Mhm.
assistance and seeking assistance and help. And obviously the disabilities and stuff like that and the physical sides that come with it. Like we know that we can seek help. We know that we do seek help, but do you still feel that the fix has to come from you? Then it's on you to just fix it.
Not anymore. I used to think that way, but I mean, when this was happening, I immediately reached out to my therapist and my psychiatrist and was like, "Hey, I need extra support with this." Got a new anxiety medication to help support things through the rough patch. Got into therapy and talked through some things with my therapist. I didn't just sit in it and make myself think I've got to fix this myself, but that's something that has come with time and healing and practice. And that's one of the biggest things is we practice safety, we practice new behaviors because that's how you learn new behavior because your body learned it from old repetitious behaviors. That's what's going to lead to new ones is repeating safety.
For sure. And I think it's also one of those funny things that I think it really hit for me is like I allowed myself and my body to learn through trauma. And now for some reason I feel like, oh, I just gotta be the way. If I don't fix it, it's not real, like it doesn't count. Then in reality, something as simple as my lovely wife saying, like, hey, if you can't sleep, sleep different. You goose. If you can't sleep, get up and go do something. Go right.
Exactly.
Go
Yes.
do something like that and actually allowing my sleep schedule to change and staying up a little bit later because I sleep better later, and if I
Mhm.
have the opportunity to sleep in late, that's okay. Like I'm sleeping the same amount of hours and then going out and doing things functionally or working on a project or writing or things like that into the night. Okay, it's just time. Something as simple as that of taking that advice and how much, I don't know, obviously helpful it is, but then telling myself
It
like,
was some of
hey,
the best advice I've ever had,
yeah,
honestly.
but yeah, the idea of like, I can learn from a positive person just as much as I can from all the people that treated me like absolute garbage. That's
Mhm.
crazy of a thing. And I think that also it goes into then like knowing that and understanding that helps you move forward either as a parent or as a friend or even as a healthcare professional, just as much as it does as a patient to go in and, either stand your ground, kind of knowing what needs to change, but also taking that advice and taking it seriously from positive influences, I think is a very big gap that some folks don't really bridge because they do think they have to be the one to take it on. Like
Mhm.
it's even folks that realize that you're not on an island still try to hold the tides at bay and not encroach on their own shores without any assistance from the ships coming by.
Yeah. So do you think if our brains predict and our bodies reinforce those predictions, maybe the hardest part of healing is realizing the world we've learned isn't the only world that exists?
Yeah, I think that
Yeah.
also gets illustrated really well. Well, just in daily life, but then we look at stuff like what is that? What was the movie called? The Truman Show,
Yeah,
right?
the
Like
Truman Show.
on the surface, what was the Truman Show? It was just about a guy who, slowly discovers that his life has been carefully constructed. Psychologically, that's, something relatable. I think Truman doesn't question his world because it's all he's ever known. To him, it's normal. He doesn't know that there's another way because he's, never experienced one, right? That's all he's ever
Exactly.
known, like we just talked about. And I think that that a lot of us do the same thing emotionally. We assume our way of coping is just who we are. I don't know how many times that's going to make me kind of tear up because I don't know how many times I've just said, well, I am who I am. Why can't you accept that? Like that was a
Yes.
projection that I let out of anger because I needed to, like, I couldn't be wrong. So I needed to be like, no, I am who I am. You need to accept me. But no, guy, because you're not even accepting who you are because it's not healthy. Like,
Yeah.
we assume the way we that love when we grow it up, what we saw, especially, I mean, once again, in my case, like seeing, especially, and I don't ever just say people should get divorced or anything like that, but when you see toxic relationships that aren't healing and you see parents that should go separate ways of work this out differently, but that's all you ever see is their aggressive toxicity and how it's geared towards you or your siblings, if you have any. Like, even if you hate that, sometimes like that's the love that you've learned. So even if you don't want to, that's what you take forward.
Well,
Your
yeah.
anxieties. Go ahead. I'm sorry.
I was gonna say about the Truman Show, the biggest thing about the Truman Show is that he leaves.
Yeah.
He
He
leaves the
fights.
only
Yeah. The
world he's
fight.
ever
Yeah.
known. I mean, that's like the most crucial part of what he is in this constructed world. It's all he's ever known, and he finally decides, I'm gonna leave this, and I'm gonna go into the unknown, and I'm gonna go out there and see, because he realizes what's around him isn't working. It's not real.
And it only took so and another beautiful thing about that is it really did only take one person to start breaking the facade for him. It
Mhm.
only took one night with one person for him to really start questioning things, and then that to cascade later in life for him to kind of hang on to, and then start seeing these things, start seeing the things that he could change. And it wasn't just that who he was in that. I mean, even before he realized it was a show, like he could see the
Mhm.
facade around before he knew the actual overall concept. He didn't need to be anxiety or pleasing these people who are clearly fake or, be perfect at his job. Like he wanted to, I mean, in a way, kind of have more conflict, but in a positive way, stand up
Mhm.
for himself and have that emotional intelligence and distancing himself from the negativity. Because I think it showed very well adaptation over time, how we adapt who we are to the situations that we have been. And
Mhm.
it is, sometimes it is what it is. The hardest part is realizing we can exist in another way. And, Truman going through the storm and listening, in a way, denying the voice of God, even though it was just, the director in that case,
Yeah.
and making it through the storm and still exiting is I think obviously people look at that show as, Jim Carrey being, Jim Carrey in a different role, but, that show really does exemplify exactly what we're talking about in a big way and the importance of going through the storm sometimes to find the exit.
And I think one of the most interesting things about the movie is no one has to convince Truman the world's normal. He just believes it because it's all he's ever experienced. And I think that's why so many people stay stuck. And it's not just because they're choosing suffering, it's because they don't realize there's another way to live. So, in thinking about that, have you ever realized something you thought was normal actually wasn't?
Absolutely. I mean, it was very normal of me to have like conversation of just like if a conversation didn't have a raised voice somewhere in it, like, and it wasn't passionate. Like like it was normal to think that arguments were like a normal part of life
Hmm.
and that you were passionate about something if you showed that passion outwardly. And that's great. I don't like to use the word crazy, but anyway, like to me, that's how it eventually felt to me after, realizing that it's not a normal you can just have a discussion and like talk, like
Yeah.
two people and go through. And sometimes it is still hard. I'm not going to say that that I'm perfect. I still fall into once again the same trap sometimes. But I think also being around people that are going to recognize that and call it out versus just a crowd of NPCs that are just there
Hmm.
going with the flow with you and pushing that along. I think is super important. And I'm not saying going out and find people that are negative and toxic and just trying to get you into further trouble and just push you into places, but finding people, whether it's a psychiatrist or a solid relationship, it's still going to take work and having them, well, for me anyway, push me in ways to grow and growing together, I think is extremely important. And challenging that status quo and being willing to stand by someone while you're challenging it is what that really takes sometimes. Because I think we get really trapped by that concept in
Oh,
our own
for
lives.
sure. Yeah, I think, realizing healthy relationships can initially feel unfamiliar, or learning that your constant hypervigilance wasn't just your personality, or discovering that always anticipating the worst wasn't normal, it was adaptive. I think therapy definitely helps you question beliefs that you've accepted your whole life. And that can be a way of learning what a healthy relationship is like, is developing a relationship with a trusted therapist. For a lot of people, that can be where it starts, and I think that might be one of the places it started for me, honestly.
So when you're talking about like kind of seeing the patterns,
Learning
yeah.
yeah, and learning that safety.
Yeah, and I think that's the thing. Like, I think we kind of see the patterns and we repeat them and we continue to repeat them. But then when we kind of get that the true knowledge of the safety you just talked about, and then something eventually kind of starts happening in that not a vacuum, but that net. I I think the patterns stop feeling like something that we do. I think it starts
Mhm,
feeling like we are. And I think that can get a lot of people stuck because even when you're in the pattern, you start to kind of go on this journey, then you kind of fall back into that same trap of like, because I think when you have call it a relapse, I think into it,
mhm.
I think that is then reteaching. We allow ourselves to be retaught that nope, this just is who I am because I tried to do better, but now I fell back into it. And I think that's what really builds the idea of survival and allowing it to become our personality.
Well, I mean, maybe that's the next question. When do coping strategies stop being coping strategies and start becoming our identity? Because maybe you spent 20 or 30 years being the peacekeeper or the people pleaser or the one who always prepared for disaster. At what point do you stop saying, this is how I survive, and start saying, this is just who I am?
Just so when you think about coping mechanisms, and when they stop being a coping mechanism and start feeling your personality,
I think that's
you know what I'm
such a
trying to say?
hard
Like,
yeah, I think that's such a
yeah,
hard question because if you've been doing something since you were, say, 6 years old, how would you even know the difference?
that's true because we aren't born. I mean, do you feel like we're born with some amount of personality, or is it purely built?
Nurture versus nature, right? I mean,
Yeah,
that's
exactly.
that's such a debated thing. How much of our personalities are from our experiences versus just what's in our DNA? And I that's a whole other episode, I think.
True. Yeah. I mean, I think it's funny because I think it's one of those things that we like, it gets touched on in a lot of the topics. And I think that's something we're going to realize in going through this is there's a lot of similarities in handling different situations of life and the things that we all go through. And we can kind of recognize those similarities in a lot of different ways is what I'm trying to say, in a lot of
Mhm,
different topics that we cover. And I think kind of, some of that realization can be good if it kind of works out that way. But well, for example, have you ever like realized something more on topic here that you thought was part of your personality was actually just survival? Something that you kind of learned in that process. Like you thought this is who I am. Oh, no, this is actually just me surviving.
that's wow, that's a hard question too. Yeah, I would say I've experienced that. I've thought of myself as a certain way for very before I found out I was autistic, for example, and I used to always mask, but I didn't know I was masking. I didn't know that was a thing. I just thought this is how I've got to act to make people like me, to be this people pleaser, to get along in situations and social situations where things were not natural and were hard and I wasn't my authentic self. But you put on this mask so often, it starts to make you question, like, is this just who I am? Is this me? And so finding out I was autistic in my early 30s and being able to be like, this is taking that mask off and going through the unmasking process was definitely world shaking for me because I had thought of myself as all these different masks that I used to put on and thought those were me. And then I come to realize I'm someone totally different. And that rocked my world.
Yeah, I mean, and that's once again something we've touched on, right? Like it's the longest road is actually what happens when you actually just when you start to walk on it, right? Like that healing process after you make that decision to decide to take this journey, it's a long, rocky one. It's not easy because
Hmm.
like you said, falling into habits of wanting to revert back to this is just who I am. Like I raised my voice again. I let this person talk to me like this. I backed down. I should have stood up for myself. I didn't. I went into a situation, frustrated and anger. I let it just kind of trigger me instead of listening again.
Mhm.
There's a thousand different things that we can then pull ourselves back and just accept them as habit. And once again, like we've both said, and that you just said, that this is how I am. This is who I am. Everyone should accept it. It's just like it's not the answer. I think that's been the most powerful thing for me is being in a safe place where that's not the answer, and being with
Yeah.
a partner. And my wife is very big in that, of saying like not accepting that, like that's a, I don't even want to say it's like kind of the cowardly way out of it in that situation, but it is really just breaking that, like, no, this is not going to continue to be a habit. Like, stop. It's okay to stop and grow and be something else.
That makes me
Choose who you
think
want to
of
be.
yeah, it makes me think of conditioning and learned survival. So like imagine you touch a hot stove, you probably only have to
Oof.
do it once. Your brain learns.
Yeah, maybe.
The next time you see a hot stove, you just know to be careful. Our emotional lives definitely work the same way. If speaking up always led to punishment, you might learn to stay quiet. If being perfect or in love, you might become a perfectionist. If keeping everyone happy, preventing conflict, people pleasing starts to make sense. None of those behaviors mean there's something wrong with you. They mean your brain was paying attention. And that's the amazing thing about the brain is that it's constantly asking one question, what worked last time? The problem is sometimes what worked when we were 8 doesn't work still when we're 35.
Yeah, that's just a point in itself, right? I think that even if they kind of things that used to protect us can become obstacles in our life as we grow. Like survival strategies can be intelligent responses. They can be the response that fits, right? It can be the appropriate response. Then
Mhm.
that's where context comes in. So you shouldn't. We should. We really need to kind of think about moving away from is this behavior bad to is this still help?
Well,
Is
I
it
think
still
that's
helpful behavior?
yeah, I think that's one of the most compassionate ways to look at ourselves instead of asking, "Why am I like this?" We can ask, "When did I learn this?"
And maybe an even better question is this strategy still working for my life that I'm trying to build now?
So, is strategy still working for life I'm trying to build now? I think that definitely comes into play with boundaries feeling mean because people pleasing once kept you safe, or learning to disagree without feeling guilty, or realizing independence became isolation. And I think that for me, therapy helped me update old survival strategies. And I went through processes like EMDR, and I think one of the biggest things I did that helped with overcoming some of these patterns was I did ketamine therapy, which ketamine rewires neural pathways in the brain, which kind of is what you have to have happen for healing. You can do that naturally, and it can take, several years for your brain to rewire, and having to practice new behaviors and practicing safety. And it was a combination of things for me, but that just kind of sped up the process a little bit, but it still has taken years for my brain to heal.
Well,
And it's
absolutely. And I
still
think
healing.
yeah, I don't think it's something that stops, right? Like it's one
No.
thing we learned, that like it never stops. And using those different therapies can like kind of jumpstart you in a way and put you, like you said, you make that decision, you get on the path, and help you walk that path and get through a good chunk of it. But there's still going to be a lot of times that you have to, find a way to stay on that path and not worry about stepping in a pothole. You're going to twist your ankle. You're going to fall down on that path, flat on your face, like the bottom of the stairs, like we talked about. It's going to happen.
Mhm.
But the point is, like, when you are able, once that has passed and you kind of dust yourself off a little bit, okay, move forward again, walk it back. No, that's not who I am. It was a crappy situation. That sucked. I don't like it. I'm going to move forward. And I think that even in a lot of times of me, even the concept of like, oh, well, I'm not going to be like my parents. I don't want to be like my parents. I want to be different. I want to be myself. And even using that as a target versus just finding out what makes you better, I think is also something that kind of has historically pulled me back. Like not wanting to be like someone else is actually further the trap versus focusing on what my own path can look.
So I think this is probably a good spot to put a pin in it for today. And we'll definitely continue this conversation next week because there's a lot more to still get into with this topic. So, after everything we've talked about today, if someone asks you, why do we repeat the patterns? What's your answer now?
Yeah, I think it's for our We repeat patterns because of our individual training. And by training, I mean the events and things that have happened in life that we've either had to survive or work around that led us to build habits of who we are. I think we're a series of habits in a a fleshy brain full of neurons that kind of
Mhm.
tries to pilot itself through life. I think the retraining ourselves is a big part because we've already been trained in a certain.
Yeah, I think I'd say because our brains are incredibly good at protecting us, the problem is they don't always realize we're living in a different chapter than the ones those patterns were created in.
Absolutely. Those when the stimuli change, the reaction should change with it, and sometimes I don't think we let it.
I think so. So I think this is where we're going to end for today. If you haven't joined us on Threads, we have a community we're growing there where you can talk with us and engage in conversations with us there. And if you like today's episode, please subscribe, leave us a comment, rate the show. We'd appreciate all of those things so much. And we hope you join us next week to finish this conversation.
Absolutely, and we absolutely will. And remember, there's always spot on the couch that's open. I think the big thing to say as we're going to keep on this topic is do remember that these situations are not because you're lazy. It's not because you're weak, and it is something we're all on a journey for. And we're so thankful that you're, even exploring the other possible solutions with us. So join us in the
Absolutely.
future.
Thank you so much.